Imagine being asked to identify the greatest hero in history, only to answer, he was just an idiot. That is exactly how Solon Berclay describes Ares, the man who defeated the Demon King, saved the world, and was eventually killed by one of the Demon King's servants. Solon is not joking. He is a legendary sage, a magical prodigy, and one of the three people who fought beside Ares. If anyone should be praising the hero, it should be him. Instead, Solon insists that Ares had no talent at all. No excepcionales wordsmanship. No overwhelming magic. Not even a divine blessing. And yet, according to Solon, without Ares, nobody would have won. So how did an ordinary boy become the one person capable of carrying three geniuses all the way to victory? To understand that, we have to rewind to the beginning, back to the day Ares decided that the most unpleasant genius in the entire academy was going to become his teacher. Ares was already training relentlessly at Fam Academy. Every day, he copied Leon's swordsmanship, endured Maria's brutal weekly challenges, and pushed his body far beyond what most students considered reasonable. But Ares still wanted more. His next target was attack magic. The problem was that Ares had absolutely no talent for it. The Academy's magic teachers rejected him almost immediately. They did not even need a practical test. A warrior trying to learn magic was simply not worth their time. Ares expected that answer. In fact, he had already chosen someone else. Solon Berclay. Solon was a thin, silver-haired prodigy who had surpassed the Academy's teachers shortly after enrolling. He rarely attended class, spent most of his time wandering around, and carried himself like the entire school was a badly designed experiment. Basically, he was a teenage genius with unlimited knowledge, no patience, and the social skills of a locked door. Ares found him in the academy and walked straight up to him. Solon Berclay, teach me magic. Solon did not even look at him. No. Then he kept walking. Ares followed him. Solon told him that he was an ordinary idiot wasting his life trying to become a hero. He asked why a genius like himself should spend time helping someone who had no magical potential. Ares calmly pointed out that Solon always looked bored whenever he appeared at school, and that he seemed to have no friends. That hit a nerve. Solon immediately began gathering magic in his hand and warned Ares never to come near him again. Ares wisely moved out of the way. There was no reason to turn a conversation about friendship into an early funeral. But one rejection was not enough to stop him. A week later, Ares tried again. Solon insulted him again. Ares returned the following week. Solon insulted him even more creatively. This continued for nearly a month. Every time Solon saw Ares, he told him to disappear, called him trash, or threatened to kill him. Fortunately, Maria's training had already destroyed Ares' ability to be intimidated by normal human hostility. Eventually, Solon gave up, not because Ares had become convincing, but because Ares had become impossible to remove. He admitted that he really was bored at the academy. His enrollment had mostly been forced by political pressure. His father was a talented mage from a low-ranking noble family, and the academy's high-ranking director wanted the prestige of saying that Solon had studied there. Solon had already exhausted the academy's library. He had nothing left to do, so he agreed to teach Ares. But he would do it his way. Solon pulled a ridiculous number of textbooks out of his bag. The books should not have fit inside it, which meant he was using some kind of storage magic. He placed the entire curriculum in front of Ares and gave him 1 week. Ares stared at the pile. This was not a beginner's lesson. It was everything first-year magic students were supposed to study over an entire year. Solon simply told him that becoming a hero was even more impossible. If Ares wanted to learn magic without talent, he had no right to complain about a few books. And because Solon was technically correct, Ares had no comeback. He returned to his room and began reading. He stopped sword training. He avoided Maria whenever possible. He sacrificed sleep, meals, and every spare minute he had. He read during the day, at night, between classes, and even while eating. For 1 straight week, Ares did nothing except force magic theory into his head. When the deadline arrived, he found Solon and announced that he remembered everything. Solon did not test him. He simply said, "Follow me." Apparently, Solon trusted Ares because Ares was too honest to lie. For a genius who distrusted everyone, that was already a strange form of respect. Solon led Ares into an empty classroom and told him to cast a fire spell. Ares followed the instructions perfectly. He recited the incantation, focused his mind, and waited. Nothing happened. Not a spark. Not smoke. Not even the magical equivalent of a disappointing party popper. Solon examined the spell and confirmed that the incantation was correct. The problem was that he could not feel any magic coming from Ares. Solon asked him to imagine fire. Ares imagined the flame inside a fireplace. Solon told him that the image was too weak. He needed to imagine something larger, hotter, and more violent. So Ares tried again. Still nothing. Instead of becoming annoyed, Solon became fascinated. Solon could cast magic naturally, without consciously analyzing every step. Ares was different. He could not feel magic at all. He had to understand every part of the process and deliberately reconstruct it from the beginning. For Solon, this was a failure. For research, it was an opportunity. He began explaining the spell in greater detail, adjusting Ares's mental image and giving him tiny corrections. Ares still could not produce a flame, but Solon never stopped teaching. The cold genius had accidentally discovered the perfect experiment. What happens when someone with no talent refuses to stop learning? Solon only visited the academy once a week, but he always trained Ares when he came. Over time, the lessons became less hostile and more serious. Ares discovered that Solon was not simply rude. He had grown up surrounded by political schemes and noble families who treated every relationship like a negotiation. Solon had learned not to trust people, so he chose isolation before anyone else could betray him. He also understood Maria better than most people did. According to Solon, Maria was not a perfect saint. She was a girl crushed under everyone else's expectations. She could sense the presence of the gods better than any bishop, but the people around her had forced her into the role of a holy figure until her personality became twisted by resentment. Ares mentioned that Maria's training involved being struck with a whip, while she claimed that faith would make the pain disappear. Solon tried to explain that this might be connected to healing miracles. Then Ares added that Maria had recently been insulted by a high-ranking bishop and seemed to smile more happily every time she swung the whip. Solon went completely silent. For once, even the genius had no academic explanation for what was happening. Still, he quickly changed the subject and ordered Ares to resume magic training. A genius's schedule apparently had no room for emotional processing. Years passed. Students and teachers watched Ares continue training without seeing any results. To them, he was a strange, ordinary boy wasting his youth on an impossible dream. But Ares refused to stop. He had no gift for the sword, no natural magical talent, no divine miracle waiting to awaken. All he had was the decision to continue. Then, at the beginning of his third year, something finally changed. A tiny flame appeared at the tip of Ares's finger. It was weak. It was unstable. It was nowhere near the kind of magic that could impress a professional mage. But it existed. Ares had done what the theory said he should never be able to do. He had cast magic without the talent required to cast magic. Solon reacted as if Ares had just rewritten the laws of the universe. He praised the result as a breakthrough that could overturn traditional magical theory. He shouted about the significance of effort, repetition, and understanding. For Solon, this was a scientific revolution. For Ares, it was the fulfillment of a dream. He thanked Solon, and only then did the emotion finally catch up with him. Tears ran down his face as he realized that he had achieved the impossible. Not because he was secretly gifted, but because he had refused to accept the limits everyone else had given him. Years later, Solon would still insist that Ares was an idiot. He would say Ares was ordinary, unqualified, and completely unsuitable for the noble title of hero. But Solon also admitted that Leon, Maria, and he were arrogant geniuses who believed their own talents would be enough. When they faced the Demon King in the Rosaroff forest, their abilities failed them. Ares was the one who adapted. He used weak fire magic with oil instead of attacking directly. He used wind magic to blind enemies during sword fights. He understood that a weak spell could become powerful if used at the right moment, and that overwhelming power could become worthless when used carelessly. That was what Ares taught Solon. Not how to cast a stronger spell, how to use the spell he already had. Solon eventually called Ares his only friend. He said that even without Leon, Maria, or himself, Ares could still have defeated the Demon King. But without Ares, none of them could have won. And that is the contradiction at the heart of Ares' story. He was not a hero because destiny selected him. He was not a hero because he possessed a legendary power. He became a hero because, while everyone else was waiting for talent, permission, or fate to save the world, Ares kept moving forward with nothing but an ordinary body and an impossible goal. Solon hated calling him a hero because the title made everything sound simple. It made people forget the years of failure. It made them forget the pain, the humiliating lessons, the weak spells, and the countless moments when quitting would have been completely reasonable. But Ares did not quit, and sometimes that is the most terrifying kind of talent in the world. Solon's interview ends with one final piece of advice. If you want to understand Ares, do not only study the legend. Go to his hometown, the village of Talais. Because the story of the hero who defeated the Demon King did not begin with a grand prophecy. It began with an ordinary boy who had nothing special about him, and still decided that the world would have to make room for his dream.